Tonight we take a look at two movies at either end of the artistic spectrum. The hemmed-in blockbuster and the avant-garde cheapie. The only two categories of movies thought to be profitable. And we ask, whatever happened to the movies in the middle? Welcome to a middling Macclevoid at the movies. For 30 years you've sat there wondering, when is there going to be a sequel to Twister? No, you have. Come on, be honest. You've thought about it every single day. Twister, that huge culturally significant blockbuster from 1996. When are they going to make another one? Why haven't there been 20 up to now? And numerous franchise spin-offs, you know, your own little mini tornado kits that you could take out to unpopulated areas and generate your own, you know, Twister colouring books and pop-up annuals and Bill Paxton action figures and Helen Hunt action figures, if you can imagine such a thing. Why didn't it popularise Wind? Wind's never really been that popular, has it? I mean, it's never really caught on, but after Twister, you'd have thought, do for Wind what Jaws did for sharks. Of course, there's been no clamour for a Twister sequel, has there? Because Twister is a sort of one of those redundant mid-90s blockbusters which was sold on the novelty of visual effects. Now, you'll be too young to remember what that was like when a movie was hyped solely on innovations in visual effects. But I'm a million years old, so I can remember what that was like. I can remember going to the cinema with a little bit of excitement. Oh, we're going to see something we've never seen before. Never been able to see photorealistic tornadoes. What would that be like? That sight is like seeing photorealistic dinosaurs 3 years earlier. No one had ever seen that before. The problem, as I'm sure you appreciate now, is that visual effects have got to the point where they are good enough. I was going to say so good, but that, you know, you, like me, might tire of wall-to-wall digital filmmaking. So let's just say that photorealistic imagery created in computers is the norm. And there is no novelty now in seeing weather events recreated in a computer or photorealistic objects or what have you. We see it all the time. Some digital trickery is so good that we don't even know that we're looking at digital imagery. If you think of David Fincher's The Killer recently, did you know that Michael Fassbinder on his motorcycle was CG? I sure as fuck did. You know, visual effects at their best, not to be confused with what we used to call them special effects, but special effects, remember, now referred to practical effects like pyrotechnic effects and things like that, in camera effects and so on. They don't refer anymore to all of the post-production stuff that's done to create illusions. We now call those visual effects, which is wankish, but there it is. So some of them at their best are so good that we don't even know we're looking at them. Now, of course, there's no question in Twisters that we know that we're looking at visual effects. You can't direct a tornado, as Jan de Bont discovered back in the day. But there has been absolutely no reason to make a Twister sequel. The only people who were interested in making a Twister sequel were the people who were originally involved in Twister. That is to say, Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt. And you might think that's because Twister was their single biggest individual hit. Bill Paxton, may peace be upon him, said to James Cameron, hey, let's do a 3D version of Twister. you know, because 3D was all the rage in the 2010s, wasn't it? Let's do that. Get the audience closer than ever before to the eye of the storm. And Helen Hunt wanted to direct her own sequel, which tells us that Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt weren't very good judges of their own back catalogue. Because I can assure you, Helen Hunt, if you're watching this, and I know you do like the show, that no one on earth was interested in a sequel to Twister. Hollywood knew back in 1996 that Twister was a story that was about spectacle, and that the human story was secondary. And in that movie, indeed, it was secondary. So what do you do 30 years later when you're making a sequel? How do you catch people's attention? How do you make Twisters an interesting sell? Well, as ever, you try to sell it on the spectacle, even though the effects of that are vastly diminished. And you try to make people go on the basis, hey, look, the tornado's blowing up a power station or whatever. And you try to put someone charismatic in it, in this case, Glenn Powell. And you hope that, you know, he's rugged and raw, isn't he? And meaty, and maybe that will convince a few people to go. There's a hint of a romance at the heart of the movie, just as there was in the first one. And perhaps the thing to say about Twisters is it perfectly replicates the first film. But that is also its problem. It's no longer going to be powered to mega blockbuster status on the basis of its visual effects. There's not the material there. You know, Twister didn't have the human heart of Jaws. If Jaws could have a human heart, well, you know what I mean. Why does Jaws endure in the imagination? Why do we all love Jaws still? I'm assuming you do love Jaws because you're not a Philistine or a degenerate. On the assumption that you do love Jaws, you presumably love it not because of the shark, but because of the human characters. They're the draw. That human dynamic. Brody, Cooper, Quint. These are indelible characters, aren't they, that have, you know, got space rent-free in our head because they were so good and so vivid and so dynamic and so interesting. That, and of course the movie constructed around them is wonderful, orchestrated beautifully. But there's no such characters in Twister. And a reflection of that is the fact that none of the characters from the original film have made it to Twisters. I mean, how plausibly could they after 28 years? You know, you're not going to have a 72-year-old storm chasers with their cane going, I just want to get me one more, just one more. It's not going to be like that, is it? It can't be that way, can it? There is no line into the original movie that can be pulled. And in fairness to the filmmakers, they recognise this. So thank God this is not a legacy sequel to Twister. If Bill Paxton were alive, who knows, maybe he'd be handing off to Glenn Powell somehow. And that would be incredibly silly, wouldn't it? But, of course, that has been the basis for almost every legacy sequel made in the last 10 years, since the dreaded Force Awakens cemented that trend. So Twisters is once again about rival storm chasers trying to understand tornadoes. And that's basically all it's about. Daisy Edgar-Jones is the sort of new Helen Hunt, if you like. She's a young PhD student, meteorologist, who loses some friends in the opening sequence when she misjudges a tornado. And that does to her what, you know, that accident in Cliffhanger did to Gabe. makes her withdraw and hide away from the thing that she loves for years and years and years, until she's approached in New York by her old friend who did survive the original incident, and says, hey, Kate, come and work with us in Oklahoma. We've got a new technology that allows us to scan tornadoes from three sides, a three-dimensional image of a tornado. I'd like you to come risk your life to get these images. Nobody can read a storm like you, Kate. And Kate agrees. For the same reason that Ripley agreed to go back to LV-426, because she had to face her fear. She's never ever going to be able to move on from that terrible, terrible original incident until she confronted it. So Kate goes out to Oklahoma, and there she meets rival tornado chaser Glenn Powell, who, for a bit of contemporary relevance, is a YouTuber. Can you imagine? It's 1 million subscribers. I certainly can't imagine that. And what's his gimmick? Well, he's not a scientist. He's blue collar. He's a cowboy. He's a hillbilly, along with his sort of conspicuously working class crew. And what do they like to do? They like to fire fireworks into the eye of the storm and light them up for your cheap entertainment. That's what they're interested in. What are the middle class characters interested in? Kate aside. Well, it turns out they're gathering data for a local landowner to force people off the reservation whose homes have been destroyed by tornadoes. Boo hiss. So the movie intuits that this is a film aimed primarily at a sort of more working class audience, a more blue collar audience. They're the kind of folks, they're the kind of guys and gals who are going to want to see the big blowies. And I'm sure you've gone to see them, haven't you? The thing about Twisters is this. It follows the trajectory of the modern blockbuster perfectly, beat by beat by beat. There are no surprises here. From the beginning to the end, you know exactly how it's going to play out, exactly how the relationship between Daisy Edgar Jones and Glenn Powell is going to play out. She hates him at first, doesn't she? He's a cocky little bastard. She's a real challenge. She's feisty. But in the end, they share a bit of adversity together, and they realise that they're, good for one another. And at the end, they implicitly get close. And it's okay she's forgotten her dead boyfriend, because that was 5 years ago anyway. How much time do you need to get over someone, for God's sake? So, that's Twisters. It takes no risks. And it can't take any risks, can it? Because it's cost $200 million. And isn't that the problem? If I was sitting down, somebody put a gun to my head and said, "Do you know what, Dark, you've got to script a Twister sequel." First I'd laugh, and then when I realised they were serious, I'd say, okay. But of course you can't rely on the spectacle to bring people in any longer. That's not enough. That's only going to produce a middling gross. And these movies are so goddamn expensive. We need something else. So I tried to be innovative, and I guess I'd try to be silly. I might create a plot about the Twisters embodying the spirits of Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt's characters who'd been killed in a twin tornado event 15 years earlier or something. And the horrible realisation of Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones that, in fact, they were chasing two tornadoes with human agency. It's like they know what we're going to do before we do it. A tornado can't anticipate human activity. Kate. But what if it could? What if the spirits of Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt were in those tornadoes? What would that be like? Now you're going to say, well, that's ridiculous. But the alternative is Twisters as Made, a movie that's perfectly solid and perfectly watchable, and, as you would expect, visually very impressive, though it must be said, even though it's 28 years since the original film, the visual effects aren't much better than the original movie. I guess the 1996 film pioneered photorealistic storms. There's not really much more you can do with that. Once you've got it, you've got it. But you see what I mean? In order to make it interesting, in order to make us excited about the movie, there would have to be some left of field twist or something silly, something almost magical realist about it that would make us want to actually go and see it and would excite an audience instead of casually entertaining them for 2 hours, which is what Twisters does. It's okay, kids. It's watchable. It's fine. But it represents the kind of absolute risk-free, dearth of imagination, stolid fare that we get when these enormous budgets are at play. How can a movie innovate? How can it excite? How can it challenge when there's so much money invested that if you deviate 1 millimetre from a pre-established template, well, the suits, the money men get nervous. Don't take any chances. What if it doesn't work? So Twisters is every modern blockbuster. It's incredibly safe. But safe is not good, is it? You know, when every joke seems to have been written by committee, when every scene plays out to a pre-established set of beats, when every action sequence, you set your watch by when the next action sequences are going to arrive, because you know exactly where they get dropped in the movie's timeline for pacing and for best effect. When you know all of this stuff, it's like watching a tape of a joke you've already heard. And the punchline wasn't that good to start with.
Is that it? Nope.
After the break, we'll discuss another new release, Longlegs, which is very, very different to Twisters, but in some respects is symptomatic of the same problem that has infected mainstream filmmaking. You will return for that discussion momentarily. Thank you.
The experiment was a success until someone terminated the project. Now, the only survivors have become the only suspects. Keanu Reeves, Morgan Freeman for the director of The Fugitive. Chain Reaction, rated PG-13, starts August 2nd.
A soft drink is not a magic potion, a status symbol, or a badge that says who I am. It will not make me popular. Wanna hang? It will not make me run faster or jump higher. It will not make me more attractive to the opposite sex, though I wish it would. If I need a badge, I'll become a security guard.
Welcome to the force.
If I need a refreshing drink, I'll obey my thirst. Image is nothing, thirst is everything. Sprite.
Flag the flag, the flag was green.
I called the police. I really did.
We're trying to clear the room there, boys. Thanks a bunch.
Why did you make me come out?
Give a cop reserve, please. now on 0891 29 29 29. That's party time on 0891 29 29 29. Call them now.
Because you believe in the magic of the movies, in the fun of falling in love,
That's your dog.
and in the thrill of making a dream come true.
She's obviously nuts about me.
Fly to a movie that you'll remember forever. Space Jam, rated PG. Now playing.
Longlegs is a police procedural / horror movie produced by Nicolas Cage. Indeed, Nicolas Cage is the titular Longlegs, a sort of creepy Pete Burns lookalike who is implicitly involved in a series of killings involving entire families. The how he's involved precisely is a matter for FBI agent Lee Harker. It's played by Micah Monroe. And Nicolas Cage's salary of $5 million was half the whole budget of this movie. It's only a $10 million movie. Dead cheap. Cheap as chips, you might say. It's got one big star in one extremely memorable central performance that anchors the whole thing and indeed, is the attraction. One can see why you would pay Nicolas Cage $5 million. Because Nicolas Cage certainly adds at least 20% to any movie he is in, one way or the other. So what kind of a movie is it? Well, really, it's a bit like a Thomas Harris Cheese Dream. It's the arty horror version of The Silence of the Lambs. It plays very much like a kind of 70s grindhouse movie. It's got that kind of, artistic fetishism about it. And it's good. It's interesting. It's creepy. It's unnerving. But it's also absolutely devoid of drama. It's a mood piece. This is a cinema of sensation. This is a movie that's calibrated very carefully, in a very artful way, to discombobulate you. It's a movie that never looks you in the eye. Only Nicolas Cage looks you in the eye. You remember in Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme tried to involve you directly in the action by having every character look directly into the lens. No, not so here. The camera's always off to one side. It's always above or slightly below or just to the left or just to the right of the subject. And sometimes that creates a sort of almost cant expressionist angle, which further adds to that sense of it being psychologically unnerving. A movie that puts you at a distance and keeps you at arm's length throughout its duration. And like all artistic movies, it's stilted, it's mannered. There's a perpetual disconnect, an ongoing unease. If I was a character in Longlegs, I'd talk like this, and I would look just above the camera like this, and I would talk in this very unnatural way that made you really uncomfortable. And it's okay because what I'm doing here the way I'm framed, and the fact that I appear to be almost in a trance-like state, almost in a state of suggestion, is actually intrinsically linked to the plot, as it is revealed in a sort of expository burst at the end of the movie. The way I'm framed is also relevant, and that will become clear at the end of the movie. So it's not just artistic wank for the sake of it. It is actually part of form and content coming together to produce something which works in a holistic way. Okay? Many people have said Longlegs reminds them of things like Zodiac and Silence of the Lambs, and it should do, because it's inspired by these things, and it reproduces elements of these things. You know, the families that have been murdered by an elusive, sadistic serial killer. A killer that writes to the FBI and the police using ciphers. This is familiar territory. But this is not a movie for a mainstream audience. This is a movie for a niche audience, for a sort of, you know, the 11 people who have no friends, who go to the cinema at 11:50 in the evening. It's for them, you know. It's not for you. You like your mainstream stuff, you like a bit of human connectivity, you like drama that you can latch onto. And it does make you think of a movie like Silence of the Lambs. Because if you think about Silence of the Lambs, and I know I've mentioned it before, it's one of my favourite movies, Silence of the Lambs. And the reason I love it is because it's so successful at marrying certain elements like thriller, like horror, with a real sort of with artistry, with great artistry, but in a way that captures and appeals to a wide audience. It was deservedly a huge hit. And deservedly an Oscar winner, in my opinion. I know you're one of those fuckers who go, oh, but Manhunter was better, wasn't it? I preferred Manhunter. Well, you're going to love Longlegs then, if that's your view. But I think that Jonathan Demme's movie was more successful in making a connection with its audience because it invited them in. It hooked us, partially because of the propensity of Hannibal Lecter to look directly at the camera. What did you see, Clarice? What did you see? You think that if you find Buffalo Bill, you could stop those terrible lambs screaming, don't you? Worked very well, don't you think? Longlegs doesn't do that, because Longlegs is not interested in appealing to a broad audience. It's appealing to an arty horror crowd. And of late, there has been a trend in Hollywood to gravitate toward either the Twisters kind of movie, which is a very safe, big budget blowout, or something like this, where lots of chances are taken, there's a bit of experimentation. The movie takes some risks in terms of it risks alienating its audience, which is always a very good risk to take if you're a filmmaker. But watching both of them, it just reminded me that there was a time when there was a film category in the middle brow thriller, or the middle brow movie that was designed, that was budgeted, by the way, in the middle, so that it could take a few chances without alienating a mass audience. And that used to be Hollywood's bread and butter. And that middle category was vital, wasn't it, for the health and vitality of the movie industry. Because if all you've got of safe, confected, pre-packaged blockbusters at one end, and this kind of avant-garde, masturbatory horror at the other, there's nothing in the middle for general audiences to get excited about. Longlegs is too odd to be a mainstream hit, and Twisters is too bland to be memorable and to do anything other than generate a little bit of front-loaded cash and then dissipate on the wind. Do you like what I did there? The film industry, when it was healthy, was built on movies that were pitched somewhere in the middle. Movies that really lasted because we were fascinated by the characters. And there was great artistry there, which we came to appreciate over time through rewatching, multiple rewatches. It's almost as if the makers of Longlegs know that people aren't going to watch this movie a lot. I mean, you know, it will become a cult hit, don't get me wrong. It's got that sort of quality to it. So some people get to know it very, very well, but you and I will only see it once or twice, and we'll forget it. Even despite Nicolas Cage's appearance. And the reason we'll forget it is because there are no human characters in it. There's nobody to connect us to the drama. There is no drama. There is only mood and sense and unease. And that's fine. But, unfortunately, Virginia Woolf's cinema of sensation never came to pass. The art form that we love in the 20th century was built on narrative. Narrative borrowed perhaps from literature, but then, translated into a distinct cinematic vocabulary, which we now all understand and we're now all fluent in. So those middle-brow movies are gone. And where have they gone? To streaming, you ask? Well, maybe. But even the versions that appear on streaming are confected and sort of AI generated, aren't they? They're treated as sort of disposable filler. And they're made that way. There's not that passion and craft about making the sort of original story, the middlebrow story that used to be everything as far as the movie industry was concerned. Sure, you had a few blockbusters throughout the year, but in the 45 weeks of the year you didn't have blockbusters, you had movies like The Silence of the Lambs, didn't you? Movies that allowed people to showcase star power and creativity behind the camera, but pitched at a level that had wide appeal. That's gone, and these two releases, Twisters and Longlegs, exemplify that. If I want to see the movie in the middle, I can't, because it's not there, it hasn't been made, it could be found nowhere, it will not be on streaming in 3 months' time, it doesn't exist, it has been discontinued, written off in advance as non-profitable, an object of audience indifference. So, congratulations. You killed the movies. Feel good now, do you?
You see a lot, Doctor. But are you strong enough to point that high-powered perception at yourself?
Twisters is rated certificate 12A for violent gusts of wind. Longlegs is certificate 15 for violent Nicolas Cage. Now, if you'll excuse me, well, I've got an evening to prepare for, so. Thank you for watching this videogram presentation to the very end, you perverts.